3 seasons ago, I pushed a 6-cent piece of copper wire through the main stem of a brandywine tomato about 4 inches above the soil. The plant next to it, same variety, same bed, same water, got the standard copper fungicide spray every 10 days. By August, the sprayed plant had early blight on the bottom third of its leaves. The wired plant had none. I ran the comparison again the next year. Same result. The method was published in a 1933 USDA Extension Bulletin, quietly dropped from every recommendation list after the war, and never made it into a single modern gardening book I own. Stay with me to the end, because there is one detail about the wire's gauge that matters more than anything else, and most people who try this get it wrong. Let me tell you what I actually have on my workbench, because this is the part where most internet write-ups go vague, and I want to be specific. I have a photocopy made from microfiche at a regional library archive about 2 hours from here of USDA Farmers Bulletin material from 1933, written up out of work done at the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. The technique they describe is called stem copper inoculation. They recommend it as a low-cost prophylactic against early blight and late blight in field tomatoes for home and small farm growers. 6 cents of wire per plant. That is what the bulletin says. That method stayed in extension circulation through the early 1940s. Then between roughly 1947 and 1952, it quietly disappeared off the recommendation lists. It did not get debunked. There was no follow-up paper showing it failed. It just stopped being printed. What replaced it on those lists was the new generation of synthetic fungicides coming out of post-war chemistry, the chlorothalonil class compounds and the dithiocarbamates, tractor-mounted sprayers, standardized rates, things you could put on a product page. Now, I want to be honest with you. I am not telling you somebody sat in a back room and decided to bury a tomato trick. What I am telling you is that the recommendation list got rewritten by the people who had a product to sell, and a method that costs 6 cents per plant and requires a steady hand on every single stem is not a method that fits onto a chemical company's product page. Meanwhile, for 75 years, home gardeners, people with 6 tomato plants in a backyard bed, have been buying copper sulfate spray bottles at $25 to $40 a piece, applying them every 7 to 10 days through the season and still losing the bottom third of their canopy to blight by August. That is the cost of a recommendation list written for a tractor when you're working a raised bed with a watering can. And that is exactly the kind of method that gets dropped when the list has to fit on a chemical company's product page. All right, let us keep going. I am going to walk you through exactly what I do on the test bed every spring. The procedure itself is simple. The specifics are what matter, and the specifics are where most people who try this go wrong. I wait until the transplants have been in the ground for 10 to 14 days. Not 7, not 3 weeks, 10 to 14 days. The reason is the stem. You are looking for a main stem that is at least pencil thick at the point where you're going to insert the wire. If the stem is thinner than a pencil, the wire splits it and the plant never recovers. I learned that one the hard way in 2022 on the very first attempt. Pushed it through a stem that was about the diameter of a coffee stirrer, and the plant snapped clean in half by the next morning. Wait for pencil thickness. That is the rule. The placement is 3 to 5 inches above the soil line, not in the soil, never in the soil. I will come back to why in a minute, but for right now, just remember, 3 to 5 inches up the main stem, well clear of any soil contact. I mark the spot with my thumbnail before I do anything else, because once you're holding the wire, you want to be looking at the stem, not measuring with a ruler. The wire itself I cut to about 3 inches long. The push-through is perpendicular, straight across, 90 degrees to the stem, no angle. I do not twist it. I do not work it back and forth. One steady push all the way through, and you stop when about an inch is protruding on each side. That is it. The wire stays there for the rest of the season. I do not seal the entry point with anything. No wax, no tape, no tree paint. The plant handles the closing on its own, and we will get to that in layer 4. No pruning of the wire, no removal mid-season. I leave it in until the plant is done at the end of October. And then when I pull the stem out for the compost pile, I recover the wire, drop it in a small jar of distilled white vinegar overnight to clean off the oxidation, rinse it, and it is ready for next year. A 3-inch piece of 20-gauge copper costs about 6 cents at the electrical supply counter. I have wires on my shelf right now that have been through 3 plants and 3 seasons, and they still work fine. That is the whole procedure. 10 minutes for a row of 9 plants. No spray rig, no protective gear, no rinse and reapply schedule. A 6-cent piece of wire and a steady hand. That is exactly why this never made it into a marketable product. Now, here is the science. And I want to take this slow because the mechanism is what makes the whole thing make sense. When you push that piece of bare copper through the stem, you are placing it directly in the path of the xylem. Xylem, that is the plumbing the plant uses to pull water from the roots up to the leaves. It is a column of vessels, and it runs the full length of the plant from the root tips out to the newest growing leaf. Every drop of water that comes out of the soil moves through that column. Every nutrient dissolved in that water moves with it. The xylem is, for our purposes, the highway. Copper is a trace element. The plant does not use it the way it uses nitrogen or potassium. It needs it in parts per million range, not in pounds per acre range. But at those low concentrations, copper is what we call fungistatic. Fungistatic, it does not kill the fungus, it stops the fungus from being able to grow. It interferes with cell wall synthesis in the fungal cells. The fungus lands on the leaf, tries to put out its little structures, and the copper that has been moved up through the xylem and out into the leaf tissue blocks the process. The infection cannot establish. The leaf stays clean. What happens at the wire is slow oxidation. Copper sitting in moist living tissue releases copper ions into solution at a steady, low rate. Those ions get pulled into the xylem stream as the plant transpires, as it pulls water up to the leaves, and they distribute throughout the entire vascular system, including, and this is the part that matters, including the new growth, including leaves the plant has not grown yet. That is the difference between this method and a topical copper sulfate spray. The spray sits on the surface of the leaves you can see. It protects exactly the leaf surface it touched. The first hard rain washes it off. Anything new the plant grows after you sprayed has no protection at all, which is why the spray label tells you to reapply every 7 to 10 days through the entire season. You are chasing the canopy. You're always behind it. The wire works the other direction. The wire protects the inside of every leaf. The plant has not grown yet. Topical spray protects the outside of the leaves you can see. The wire protects the inside of every leaf. The plant hasn't grown yet. That sentence took me 3 seasons of testing to be able to say with confidence, but once I saw it on the test bed, I could not unsee it. The sprayed plants kept losing their lower leaves and putting out clean new ones at the top. The wired plants kept their lower leaves all the way through August and just kept stacking new growth on top of intact old growth. Systemic protection from a piece of metal? There is nothing for a fungicide company to sell you in that picture. Now let me put numbers on it because I do not want you taking my word for any of this. I want you to see what the notebook says. Across 3 test seasons, 2022, 2023, and 2024, I ran 9 wired brandywine plants against 9 sprayed brandywine plants in the same test bed, same drip schedule, same compost amendment, same staking. The only variable was the wire. In 2022 and 2023, I used a standard copper sulfate spray every 10 days on the control row, which is a textbook recommendation. In 2024, I switched the control row to a chlorothalonil-based product to make sure the result was not specific to one fungicide. The result was the same in all 3 seasons. 7 of the 9 wired plants showed 0 foliar early blight through August. 8 of the 9 sprayed plants had visible early blight on the lower leaves by mid-July. Not a close call, not a tie. 8 out of 9 versus 2 out of 9 3 years running. That is the kind of separation you do not need a statistician to tell you means something. The notebook does not lie. The plants do not lie. I went back and read the entries from August 2022 the other night, and there is a line where I wrote in pencil, "This should not be working this well." I had to keep running it because I did not believe my own eyes the first season. The yield numbers are what really put it to bed for me. Wired brandywines averaged 18.4 pounds per plant across the 3 seasons. Sprayed controls averaged 11.7 pounds per plant. That is a 57% yield advantage from a 6-cent piece of wire. And the reason it is 57%, and not, say, 15%, is the canopy retention. The wired plants kept their lower leaves intact, which meant they kept photosynthesizing through August and into September. The sprayed plants lost their lower third by late July and were running on a smaller solar panel for the rest of the season. The productive window on the wired plants stretched about 3 weeks longer at the back end. 3 more weeks of fruit set on a plant that was still putting energy into ripening instead of trying to outrun a fungal infection. I want to be honest with you. I did not fully trust my own test bed until I saw it work in someone else's garden. Last spring, my neighbour Carol, same Carol I helped switch her fertilizer years ago, asked me if I would come look at her Cherokee purples because she was losing the bottoms again. I gave her 3 pieces of 20-gauge wire and walked her through the insertion on one plant. She did the other 2 herself the next morning. By August, her 3 wired Cherokee purples were holding their lower canopy and her 4 unwired ones were not. Same yard, same weather, same year. 57% more tomatoes from a 6-cent piece of wire. And that is the kind of result that gets buried fast when there is no product to attach to it. Now let me get into the part most people do not understand, because this is where the questions usually come in. The first thing people ask me is, why does the plant not just reject the wire? Why does it not get infected at the puncture site? Here is what actually happens. Within about 7 days of insertion, the plant lays down a callus tissue around the wire. A tight collar of wound response cells that seal the bark to the metal. I have pulled stems at the end of the season and you can see it clearly. A clean, dry callus ring. No rot, no canker, no soft tissue. The plant treats the wire the way it treats a healed pruning cut. But this only happens if you respect 3 rules, and this is where most of the failure stories come from. Rule 1, do not seal the insertion with anything. No wax, no tape, no pruning paste, no garden glue. The plant has to breathe at that wound to callus correctly. Anything you put over it traps moisture and invites bacterial soft rot. I tested this on purpose one season because I read a forum post saying you should seal it. The sealed plants develop soft rot at the insertion point within 2 weeks. Wrong. Rule 2, do not insert in the soil zone. Stay 3 to 5 inches above the soil line. The reason is Fusarium. Fusarium oxysporum lives in the soil, and if you create a wound at or below the soil line, you are giving it a freeway into the vascular system. The wire does not protect against Fusarium. Copper ions disrupt foliar fungal pathogens. They do not stop a soil-borne wilt that has already entered the xylem from below. Insert too low, and you trade early blight for Fusarium wilt, which is a much worse trade. Rule 3. Wait until the stem is at least pencil thick, thinner than that, and the wire splits the stem instead of passing through it. The plant cannot callus over a split. I lost 2 seedlings my first year by jumping the gun on a stem that looked sturdy and was not. Now wait until the stem is pencil thick. The other thing I did not expect, and I want to flag because it surprised me, is that the wire seems to give the plant's late blight resistance too, not just early blight. Late blight, Phytophthora infestans, is a different organism, different family, different mechanism. But across all 3 test seasons, when late blight came through the neighbourhood in late August of 2023, my wired plants held and the sprayed plants did not. I am not going to overclaim that. I am saying my notebook records it. I saw it twice. And the chemistry of systemic copper at trace concentrations gives a plausible reason it would work on both. But this is the kind of detail you only find when somebody actually runs the comparison instead of repeating the standard recommendation. Now, before we keep going, I want to share something with you. If what I'm walking you through here is making sense and you're starting to see how much of yield is a measurement problem rather than a luck problem, then the full system is laid out in my book, Steve's 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol. Chapter 3 is the Soil Reset and Chemistry chapter, and that is the chapter that explains why a trace amount of copper in the xylem actually does what it does. It covers the same trace element framework, copper, calcium, magnesium, boron, that turns one trick like this wire into a full system. There is a pH availability diagram in there that shows you exactly when each nutrient is and is not available to your plants. The book is $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. If you're watching on your television, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it. I will be right here. If you're watching on your phone or your laptop, the link is in the description below. All right, let us keep going because the bigger question is why this method got buried in the first place. The answer is not a backroom conspiracy. The answer is economics, and once you see the math, you cannot unsee it. Three forces did the work. The first is the post-war synthetic fungicide industry. Between 1947 and 1952, chlorothalonil class compounds and the dithiocarbamate fungicides came online at industrial scale. These products were patentable, packageable, and shippable. A 6-cent piece of copper wire was none of those things. The fungicide industry today moves hundreds of millions of dollars a year in copper sulfate and synthetic fungicide sales to home gardeners alone. A one-time wire insertion does not show up on a quarterly sales report. The second force is the land grant extension system. Extension is a wonderful institution and I rely on it constantly, but extension recommendations between 1947 and the early 1950s standardized around methods that scaled to commercial agriculture. Tractor-mounted sprayers worked on 200 acres. Hand-inserting wire into every plant did not. So the recommendation lists got rewritten around what could be standardized at scale, and the copper wire method, which only made sense at home garden scale, got quietly dropped. Not banned, not denounced. Just dropped. The third force is publishing. Modern gardening books carry advertising directly or indirectly through reviewer relationships and supply chain partnerships. A method that requires no product purchase has no advertiser support. A book chapter that says, buy this 6-cent piece of wire once, does not bring in advertising dollars. A chapter that says, apply this fungicide every 10 days does. Now, let me be fair about the counter-argument because I think it matters. Yes, the copper wire method is harder to apply at commercial scale. Yes, modern systemic fungicides have a real place in a 200-acre tomato field where labour cost per plant is the limiting factor. I am not telling you that commercial agriculture got it wrong. I am telling you that the recommendation that made sense for a 200-acre field got copy-pasted onto the recommendation list for someone with 6 tomato plants in a backyard, and the math for the two situations is not the same. For the home gardener, the math is genuinely absurd. A 6-cent wire applied once against a $25 to $40 bottle of copper sulfate spray that you reapply every 7 to 10 days for the entire season. Multiply that across 75 years of home gardeners buying that bottle every spring, and you're looking at roughly $1,000 per gardener over a gardening lifetime on a problem a 6-cent piece of wire would have solved. I am not saying anyone conspired in a back room. I am saying the recommendation list got written by the people who had something to sell, and the methods that did not fit got quietly dropped. Now, before I let you go, I owe you the detail I teased at the top, the one about the wires gauge that matters more than anything else. This is where most people who try this technique get it wrong, and it is not a small wrong. It is the difference between a plant that calluses cleanly around the wire in 7 days and a plant that develops a canker at the insertion site and dies on you in August. The correct specification is 20 gauge, bare, solid, pure copper. Every word in that sentence does work. Let me walk you through why. I tested this for one season across 3 gauges in my test bed: 14 gauge, 18 gauge, and 20 gauge. Same Brandywine variety, same bed, same insertion timing. The 14 gauge plants, that is the thicker wire most people grab off the hardware store rack. Those plants developed cankers at the insertion site within 3 weeks. The wound was simply too large for the stem to seal around. The 18 gauge worked, but it was borderline. The 20 gauge plants showed clean callus formation in 7 days and full systemic protection through August. That is the gauge the original 1933 bulletin specified, and it is the gauge you want. Bare matters because insulation blocks ion release entirely. I tested this with insulated household wire just to confirm what the chemistry told me. Zero protection. The plant's got blight on schedule like the controls. The plastic coating means the copper never contacts the xylem stream, and you might as well have pushed a piece of plastic straw through the stem. Solid matters because stranded wire frays inside the stem and creates microchannels for fusarium to enter. Pure copper matters because the copper-coated steel wire that hardware stores sometimes sell as copper releases minimal copper before the steel underneath rusts and the protection collapses by July. You want solid, bare 20-gauge copper sold by the foot at any electrical supply or hardware store. Runs about $2 for enough wire to do 30 plants. Cut it into 3-inch pieces and you are set for the season. And that is the kind of detail you would only know if you actually ran the comparison, which is why the original 1933 bulletin specified the gauge in the first place and why most internet write-ups of this technique do not mention it at all. All right, before I let you go, I want to point you to one more thing. The wire technique handles early blight and late blight, 2 of the 7 most common yield killers in a home tomato patch. But it does not handle fusarium, it does not handle bacterial wilt, and it does not handle septoria leaf spot. You need to know which problem you are looking at before you reach for the wire, because the wrong diagnosis means the wrong intervention. Chapter 9 of my book, Troubleshooting the 7 Yield Killers, page 105 through 112, has a diagnostic flowchart diagram that walks you through exactly which of the 7 you are dealing with based on what the leaves and stems are showing you. The whole book is 115 pages, $17 at stevesgardenbooks.com. If you're watching on your television, grab your phone and point the camera at the QR code on screen. No rush. Take your time pulling that up. I will be right here. If you're on your phone or laptop, the link is right under the video. The book is for gardeners who already grow but want significantly better results. And Chapter 9 is the diagnostic companion to everything I just walked you through. So that is the 1933 method, a 6-cent piece of 20-gauge bare copper wire pushed through the main stem 10 to 14 days after transplant, 4 inches above the soil, and a 57% yield advantage that has been sitting in a buried extension bulletin for 90 years. Now you know what the recommendation list left out. I have got another one of these coming up in a few weeks. A Depression-era potato spacing trick out of a 1938 Iowa State publication that I tested last season, and the numbers genuinely surprised me. Stay tuned for that. Your conditions might be different from mine, so do me a favor and test this on one plant before you commit your whole row. That is how you'll know. All right, that is what I have for you today. I'll see you in the next one.